Welcome. My name is Tim Mayo. I'm part of the Festival Organizing Committee, and this year's festival is made possible by the generous support of our festival sponsors, Brattleboro Community Television, Jenny Altschuler and Barry Green, Elizabeth Catlin, the Stepansky Family Trust, the Vermont Humanities Council, and Poets and Writers. We would also like to thank our advertisers, which are in this little thing here, the booklet that you may have, okay? And we encourage you to support them. The festival is run entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses, so we encourage you to make a donation at one of the donation boxes sometime this weekend, or you can use the QR code to donate online through our website. There are also little cards there with a survey on one side that you can use for a QR code and a donation on the other. Please take a moment now to turn off your ringers on your cell phone, but feel free to use it to take photographs and share them with our social media. I am assuming that since you're here, you probably know something about these writers before. At any rate, I will give you just a brief bio on the two of them. Helen Whybrow, is it Whybrow or what? Yeah. The Saltstones, set in Vermont Green Mountains, is a profoundly moving meditation on the lessons and wisdom that come from raising a family, tending sheep, and living close to the land. Chelsea Steinauer-Scudder's Mother Creation Kin asks, what can other human creatures teach us about mothering, belonging, caregiving, loss, and resiliency? Just to give you a little bit more about both of them. Helen is an editor-at-large for Milkweed Editions. She lives with her family in Northern Vermont. And Chelsea is the author of course, Mother Creatures Kin, and she lives with her family in Rochester, Vermont. So please welcome both of them. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Literary Festival. When I got the email inviting me to the festival and saying who my conversation partner was going to be, I was so excited. I brought my copy of this book because, well, there are a couple little sentences I might want to read, but I can always tell how much I love a book by how much I've dog-eared the pages, and this one I've sort of dog-eared to redundancy. So thank you for this beautiful book, Helen, and I'm so glad to be here with you. I think we're both going to read a little bit and have a little bit of conversation, and then we'd love to hear from you all and what you're thinking about and what questions you might be sitting with. So I'll start. And I'm just going to read 2 short chapters from this book, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about it later. But this chapter is a little early on in the book, and it's called Ascendance. One April, a portion of eastern Tennessee's population of golden-winged warblers vanished. This was a different vanishing from the one the species continues to endure in the Appalachians, where its population is 5% of historic levels. Different from the fact that this silver migrant songbird who wears a prim yellow hat and sings a buzzy song has experienced one of the steepest declines of any North American songbird over the last half-century. Different, I mean, from erasure. No, this April disappearance was an intentional vanishing act. The day after the warblers left, a massive storm system barreled through the central and southern United States, generating 84 confirmed tornadoes and leading to 35 human deaths. After the storm passed, the warblers returned, having flown almost 1,000 miles to avoid the weather. The team of researchers tracking them concluded that the birds had heard the infrasound waves, acoustic waves inaudible to human ears, produced by the approaching storm when it was as many as 560 miles away. And even though they had completed their seasonal migration and established their breeding territories, they undertook what the scientists called an evacuation migration and then returned home when it was safe to do so. In myth, the presence and behavior of birds often indicates a moment of potent transition. They come to impart knowledge or to warn or to help. Anna Badkin writes of how the ancient Greeks discerned prophecy from birds. Taking the auspices, discerning divine will from the flight of birds makes sense because birds fly closer to the Empyrean, where the gods dwell, which makes the bird's eye view closer to God's, she writes. This is a motif across cultures and religious traditions. Winged beings are taken to be closer to God. As such, birds have often been considered thin place creatures, able to move through the veil that separates our plane from the spirit plane, life and afterlife, or world and underworld, or earth and heaven, or human and divine. The dove descends to Jesus at the Jordan River. In varying ways and tellings, Raven brings light to the worlds of the indigenous peoples of the Eastern Arctic. In the Rig Veda, dark the descent, the birds are golden colored, up to the heaven they fly, robed in the waters. These words could easily describe the golden-winged warblers as roiling storm clouds approached. Pigeons were associated with the Sumerian mother goddess Ishtar. In the tomb of Tuna el-Gebel in Egypt, which was likely inaugurated in the 7th century BCE, more than 4 million mummified birds were discovered, a sizable percentage of which were African sacred ibis. A person of ancient Egypt seeking perhaps a cure for illness or a longer life could have purchased a mummified ibis and offered it in sacrifice. In a 3rd century fresco in the catacombs of Priscilla in Rome, a phoenix sits engulfed in its nest, engulfed in blood-red flames, a symbol of resurrection. It's the wings. Flight bestows upon birds the means of this boundary crossing, a dual ability to dwell in the sky and on earth, 2 realms woven into one creature. I wonder if humans have been so drawn to birds in so many of our myths and stories because this is what we too long to be, grounded and soaring, animal and divine. And do we not have the capacity to be such beings, at once rooted and connected to something greater than ourselves? I think what is at stake in this capacity, in reaching this rooted and interconnected potential, is an ecological and spiritual sense of belonging, in which we are at once emplaced and in deep relationship to that place. Perhaps better phrased, an eco-spiritual belonging, for the two are not separate. I do not then mean the sort of belonging in which the computer I type on belongs to me, or this house, or this land. That sort of belonging is limited, one-sided, hierarchical, and turned easily toward destructive and diminishing ends. The question, what belongs to me, becomes a dead end. But the inverse one, to what do I belong, brings us both to the core of our humanity and into the relationships that sustain and nurture that humanity. As a mother, I am circling this question of belonging, for I have brought a child into a precarious world. The storm clouds are on the horizon, and I must nonetheless teach her how to hold that thread of connection to the sacred and to the earth, even if storms roil her home. This means doing that work for myself, for I cannot yet say that I truly, deeply belong anywhere. I am apprenticing to the birds. I am tracking an intuition in wide arcs across the sky that mothering our children, as well as extending nurture and care to the earth, requires finding our footing first within an eco-spiritual center. This sort of relational belonging requires both the physical spaces and places and the relationships that emerge from those places. Such relationships come to serve as points of connection or sources of mystery or invitations into deeper knowing. At those relational thresholds, the points at which we meet what is beyond ourselves, we might become warm-blooded, feathered bodies taking flight. Some might name that form of belonging God, others might name it forest. These do not need to be the same thing, nor are they mutually exclusive. Did not the Tennessee golden-winged warblers display such belonging as creatures hopping among the branches of their native trees while tuning into the approaching storm, which was far from visible but nonetheless viscerally sensed? Upon observing the behavior of the warblers, the researchers began asking, and this became the central question of their subsequent paper, whether paying attention to birds could serve as an accurate advance warning of disaster. My central question became, how can I be more like a warbler? And then I'll read one more short chapter. This is called Ritual Summer. Our favorite hike is a short leg of Vermont's Long Trail, beginning a little over half a mile from our property as the crow flies. We've done this hike several times a year since we lived in nearby Jeffersonville 8 years ago now, a repetition Andrew and I enjoy and know well. We've hiked in heavy snow, in rain, in the thaw of mud, amid autumn's leaves, in the black fly-ridden days of early summer. First, we climb a steep beech and birch tunneled logging road, the owner having granted right-of-way to hikers. Then we cross a bridge deeper into the forest, which transitions to hemlock and maple trees, and brings us onto what in the winter will be used as snowmobile trails. Eventually, we come to what is, depending on the season, either a narrow and trickling or wide and babbling brook, out onto a trail that winds farther into the woods and around several massive boulders. And we arrive at one of the Long Trail's sweet little 3-sided shelters. There are 4 bunks inside, a table between them. It's always swept clean, the broom left leaning on the same place along the wall, dutifully used and replaced by whomever last stayed the night. We eat our lunch at the picnic table outside and do it all in reverse. We don't make it anywhere near the shelter this time, not because our daughter Aspen can't make it this far. We have a carrier pack for when her legs tire, but because of the eastern newt. These amphibians begin their lives in the water, then emerge onto dry land as juveniles, at which point they are called red Fs. I like this about amphibians, that they change and transform so utterly that they earn themselves new names along the way. The Eft stage, which lasts 2 to 7 years, is the only state of being in which I've seen them, because it's the only time our worlds naturally intersect. They climb into the realm of rock, dirt, and dry air as bright orange newts, an inch or 2 long, soft and shiny, with yellow and black eyes. I've always resisted the temptation to pick one up, but I imagine they are squishy and a bit sticky. When they reach adulthood, their final form, when they may be properly called eastern newts, they'll return to the water, ponds, lakes, and marshes, where the females will lay their eggs. The process will begin again. This, too, is a sort of ritual. Today on our hike, it is red eft season. Here on the trail are so many. When we spot the first one, Aspen, at 2 years old, slowly approaches and crouches down next to it, a little unsure at the start and then fully absorbed. She doesn't try to grab or touch it, taking seriously Andrew's gentle caution that they are sensitive and don't like to be handled, but she wants to get close. She stays crouched and the eft holds still, also presumably a bit unsure of the intentions of this giant creature looming overhead. A couple minutes later, Andrew and I try to urge her onward, both of us swatting the mosquitoes who have found an easy feast in our lack of movement, and both of us eager to work our legs up the mountain, reach our usual destination, repeat this particular ritual in our own predictable way. But the game is up. The only way Aspen is willing to leave the company of this new friend is in the search for more. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll make it about a quarter mile into what we'd hoped would be at least a 6-mile hike. We will spend our time looking for Fs. There's one of us will say. Aspen will run over, carefully crouch next to it, and set about playing red light, green light, a new favorite game. Green light, little buddy, she'll say. The eft will freeze. Green light, little friend. Nothing. And then, green light. The little buddy will give a start and take off for the shelter of the greenery along the trail. Red light, we find, has a higher rate of success. Aspen will do this perhaps 24 times as we walk. Not our usual start to finish on the trail, but eft to eft. We make our meandering, zigzagging, mosquito-ridden slow way. By the time we get back to the car, the feeling is unanimous. Every little friend was an utterly worthy destination. Later, I look up that word ritual in my Oxford Dictionary of World Religions, wondering if an F's life is in fact something like a ritual. But from the first sentence of the long ritual entry, I can sense that whatever poor soul was assigned to write it must have been overwhelmed. It reads, actions repeated in regular and predictable ways, both in religious and secular contexts, serving so many purposes that summary is impossible. This, happily, would give me license to explore the word broadly. Let's consider, then, the life of the red eft as a ritual across many generations. Amphibious lives that repeat in predictable and regular ways. Each begins in water, finds land, returns to water, mates, dies. But this is rather detached, and it leaves open the deeper question of whether there is intent or meaning behind the F's repeated, predictable actions. Many might say no, at least not beyond biological programming and the urge for survival. But there's something else in that vague definition of ritual that I like. What if we apply this same phrase to both an individual red eft and to the eastern newt as a species, serving so many purposes that summary is impossible? For isn't it true that we could never possibly summarize the many purposes, the many ways of being worthy of any one creature? An atheist can no more disprove God's existence than a believer can prove it. A scientist cannot claim the lack of an F's personhood or intent any more than I could claim meaning in his rites of passage, from water to land to water, from salamander to eft to salamander. Impossible to summarize could be taken as a cop-out, a convenient avoidance, but it also leaves the little fellows with some agency and some mystery, as worthy destinations indeed.
Chelsea, thank you. I am in awe. You're such a clear thinker and so articulate and so beautifully woven. I just love your book. Love the whole project. So thank you all for being here. I'm Helen Whybrow. I feel kind of low. I feel like I should stand up. But can you all hear me and see me okay? All right. Yes, of course. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so hello, Brattleboro. It's awesome to be here. Thrilled. I live about 2 hours north, but I grew up in Plainfield, New Hampshire. I went to Amherst College, so I made every stop in Brattleboro that I possibly could, going back and forth. I really have very fond old memories of this area. And thank you to the Literary Festival for bringing us. Thank you to the library for hosting us. Really honored to be here with Chelsea. So I want to just say a few words about how I feel our books intertwine and are very much in conversation with one another. And then I will also do a reading, and then we're going to open it for questions. So I really feel that Chelsea's book articulates many of the themes that are so prominent and profound in my book, and which I did not really find a way to articulate. I mean, I did, but I did it more in story, and I feel like it's just been kind of a joy to sort of enter another writer's thought process about the same themes. And those are themes of belonging and how we find belonging in our lives and on the land, themes of kinship with all of the living world, themes of mothering and motherhood in the broadest sense of caretaking and connection. So my book it's about being a shepherd for the last 25 years, but the sheep are really kind of just a portal into a much broader conversation and exploration of what it means to belong and find oneself in a place and find kinship with the larger, more than human world. So I had a really fun experience this morning. I was walking with a friend, my friend Leidy, who's here, on Putney Mountain. We decided to take a little jaunt before the reading. And we came up into that magical clearing at the top of Putney Mountain, and a woman was sitting there on the rock, and she said, "Oh, are you the shepherds?" And Leidy said, "No, we're just on a walk." And then she looked at me and she said, "Yes, yeah, we are." Here's a shepherd. And we had just happened to come upon this gathering of shepherds who are tending the sheep who are up there eating invasive species. And they were having a shepherd's convocation at the top of Putney Mountain, which was completely delightful to me as someone who's been a shepherd all my life, because my book actually is partly inspired, and the muse of my book is a group of shepherds from this old French novel called The Serpent of Stars. And in The Serpent of Stars, the shepherds go to the top of a mountain and they perform a play. And I write about, the first little piece I'm going to read is about that book, The Serpent of Stars, and how it became, this old French novel became my muse as I was writing this book. And of course, I haven't bookmarked the page, but bear with me a moment. I just started needing glasses, and it is a pain in the tush. Okay. So I'm just going to read a little piece. This is at the beginning of the book in a chapter called Initiation. And if you read the book, you'll see how much The Serpent of Stars is interwoven in my kind of imagined world here. The Serpent of Stars, originally published in 1933 as Le Serpent d'Étoiles, begins with shepherds, or rather the lack of them. They are missing at the marketplace where the narrator begins the book, and he goes in search of them. He finds one who becomes a gracious if enigmatic host, traveling across the Malafougas plateau. Much like the character in The Man Who Planted Trees, who is also a shepherd and by the same author. This host is a paternal figure, knowing things, living in a remote high place, in tune with the land as an extension of his being. But the land is the main character. The wind, the hills, the night are all creaturely, animate and insistent, both threatening and life-giving. Everything is connected and yet unknowable. Early in the journey, the narrator and shepherds make a meal of grass and night. Quote, "The night we munched with the salad. The night overflowed from the crater in slow gushes, and our mouths were full of night when we bit into the bread, crusts rubbed with garlic. The grass and night, bread and oil mixed in the belly," these are my words now, "and were breathed out again into the saps and smells of the terrain, so much so that finally, quote, we were drunk from the triple power of the sky, the earth, and truth." 9 shepherds, that's the end of the quote. 9 shepherds come to a place deep in the mountains where they perform a play on the summer solstice. They wear red scarves around their heads. They light a fire. They take elemental roles like the river, the mountain, the sky, the cold, the rain, the beast, the man. An ocean of sheep surrounds them, breathing softly in the dark. They tell stories that rise unbidden from that woolly darkness. I read this little novel in one gulp, sitting in the car in the Tempest parking lot, my baby asleep, my blood on fire. The words cut directly to my longing in the tightly wrapped cocoon, enraptured but also in bondage that comes with birth. I had just given birth to my daughter. This was my first outing with a baby when I found this book, and I described this earlier in this chapter. I was beholden to a baby and a flock of sheep that was almost in lambing time, to things that needed my body to be present day and night. His words found the ragged nerve endings of new motherhood and began, in ways that I didn't yet understand, to connect the mundane in my life to the mystic. Sometimes it takes a fiction or a dream to fill the place in your heart that you didn't even know was searching. The play made no sense to me at first. I read a page and reread it, trying to make sense of the words. Some things you understand immediately, and others, important things, you understand over time. Like many initiations, this one settled in stealthily, like snow in a dense forest of fir. All I knew at that moment was that I could see myself roaming the mountains with these shepherds, and that image awakened something in me. I was a young mother, a new shepherd, and had just moved to a 200-acre farm. I didn't yet know what I was doing in this new life. Just a year before, I had had a singular sense of freedom, and now I was responsible for so much life that required me to be bound to one place. This book pulled at my imagination, and in time its depiction of life with a flock of sheep appeared to me as a bridge between my opposing inner worlds of longing for elsewhere and at the same time wanting to belong to something that needed me. The story was also a bridge between words, poetry, and the land, which have always been my two primal loves. Wandering with their flock, these shepherds and their mythic play were full participants in a world as vast and unknowable as the sea. They were utterly part of something larger than they could hold, and they were creating meaning from that mystery. They had immersed. I wanted the same for myself. So that's just a little piece at the very beginning of the book about how I came to be a shepherd, how I came to this 200-acre farm. And the book spans 20 years. So at the beginning of those 20 years, I really didn't know what I was doing. I made a lot of mistakes as a shepherd. And the book kind of charts that growth of learning and evolving. And it also charts the growth of my daughter, who's a baby at the beginning and 18 at the end, which is another thing I love about Chelsea's book, is that sense of a daughter growing on the land. So the next piece I want to read is a story about, it's from the middle of the book, and I chose it because Chelsea's book is also a lot about how the land is changing and how birds are disappearing and how the climate is warming, and how, as people who are connected to the outdoors, as I'm sure most of you are, you notice these things. You notice these changes, and they concern you. This is a chapter that's really about the intense heat and the sense that the summer season is not like it used to be in Vermont. I've lived here all my nearly 60 years, so I sense that change profoundly as well. And I also chose this chapter to read, or part of it, because it's really about all the things you struggle with when you're a shepherd or a farmer. There's so much loss, there's so much birth, there's so much death, there's so many decisions that you make with these animals that are beholden to you and dependent on you, and you've brought them into the world, and there's just this intensity to that relationship. And this is about some of those decisions and quandaries. It's from a chapter called Lightning. The morning after the storm, I realize I am missing a ewe. Lately, I'd noticed that this ewe, who was only a year old, was getting a small udder, and her sides were extra broad. She must have gotten pregnant way out of season, months after all the others, and later than I thought was even possible, given that Icelandic ewes come into estrus only in the fall. Another cycle out of whack. Ewes will often wander away from the rest of the flock to give birth, so I look for her everywhere around the paddock where we penned them up in the storm, behind the manure spreader and the old truck, by the wood pile and the chicken coop. Nothing. We must have left her behind. Only 2 other times that I can remember have I lost a single sheep. They hate to be away from the flock alone, so if you can't hear them calling and making their way back, it is a bad sign. They could be well and truly lost, like the ewe who found our flock one day after having gone missing from her home farm for 3 weeks. She appeared out of the forest, disheveled and emaciated. She walked the boundary of the field I had just fenced, wanting to be with our flock, but too nervous to let me herd her to the gate, skittish as a wild thing, but determined to stay with us. I finally got her in with trickery, making a kind of weir with net fencing that funneled her toward my sheep before they could run out. After asking around, I found out she had escaped from new owners, run many miles through the woods, crossed the Mad River, and found us, somehow, surviving many nights alone. She'd been trying to find her old flock. Early the next morning after the storm, I head out. The air is still thick and hot. The grass is smashed down and strewn with leaves and branches from the storm. My boots squelch through the standing water in the low fields as I make my way up to higher ground, the strong smell of field mint rising as I crush it in the mud beneath my feet. I have other things to do, and I'm still looking for this animal. In my irritated mood, I think of something James Rebanks said in The Shepherd's Life about how a sheep could die out there just because we decide not to be bothered with it. I think of his 3 rules of shepherding. 1, it's not about you, it's about the sheep and the land. 2, you can't win sometimes. 3, shut up and get to work. I step through the stone wall into the day pasture. I walk along the stone wall looking for my ewe, who might right now be in labor or too preoccupied with newborn lambs to make it back to the farm. A ewe wants to stay in the spot where her water has broken to give birth. She is now bonded to that piece of ground. If I want to move her to a safer or cleaner place, she will run back to that same place in the pasture if she can. Once she has given birth, she is also reluctant to move until she is sure the lamb is sturdy enough to follow. The ewe will go without food and water for a day if she has to. I see her from a long way away. She looks huge, lying on her side. I can tell, even from a distance, from the way she's lying, that she is not in labor. She is dead. She might have cast, meaning that she got stuck on her back and couldn't get up again, and literally pressed the air out of her lungs. This is more likely to happen with a very pregnant ewe, and her unborn lambs will die inside her. This ewe is bloated like a balloon animal blown up at a fair, and there's bloody foam at her nose and mouth. The stretched skin on her belly is bruised. She looks like a cow I once saw that had been struck by lightning. My sister, who is a large animal vet in the town where we grew up, says that this happens more than you might think. I walk a few steps closer. A ragged brown form moves out of the shadow of the dead ewe's belly. At first I think it's a weasel or a rat feeding there. I recoil, but it makes a small, plaintive cry. I see that it's a lamb, drenched with sadness. It must have been born last night and stayed next to its mother all this time, taking shelter from the storm in the crypt of her body. The lamb is utterly trusting and lets me pick it up. It's wet and tiny, honey-colored on the top and cream on its bib and belly, legs dark brown and hooves still soft like shiny patent leather. It curls its lips back and trembles, shaking its head, trying to suck on my sleeve. I carry the tiny thing back to the barn and hold it at the water trough. She drinks intensely, on and on, like nothing I've ever seen. She is dehydrated and yet not at all weak. Usually lambs that have been orphaned or rejected are so weak they cannot suck at all. I have good news and bad news, I say to Kyla, who is working at the farm that day and comes around the barn looking for me. Here's the good news. Kyla works at the local high school during the school year, and for the past 3 years has helped me with the farm stand, blueberries, and gardens in the summer. She's petite, with fine brown hair always pulled back, and dresses in layers of soft cotton and shawls and lacy patterns that she knits herself. She's possibly the most sensitive, nurturing person I've ever worked with, and also the most devoted. She's the kind of person who will love having an orphan lamb to spoil. No way! That is the most beautiful creature I've ever seen, she says, as I tell her the story and hand the baby over to her. It looks just like a deer. She cradles the lamb, who is suddenly limp with fatigue, in both arms and heads inside the house to mix it a bottle. I'm not sure what to feel, distressed or lucky. I have gained a surprise birth, but I didn't expect to lose this beautiful new mother who would have had 10 or more years of birthing ahead of her. I lost a valuable animal and gained a whole lot of work. Having to keep this lamb alive by feeding it milk every few hours was not on the list. I know many farms take offspring away from the mothers at a very young age and feed them milk replacer and fortified grain in order to keep the milk and control the animal's nutrition, but I am not a fan of this system. I don't like bottle babies. Intuitively, it feels all wrong. Ruminants are not designed to eat a lot of grain. They are meant to eat grass. Nor are humans meant to eat a lot of grain-fed meat. Eating a small amount of meat produced by animals who are grazing less arable land might be the most sustainable food decision we could make. Most pastoralists around the world are producing meat and milk on land too poor to sustain cultivated crops. I take the tractor to load the mother's body into the bucket loader so I can take her into the woods to bury her. The storm has washed out vast parts of the road, exposing large loose rocks that make the tractor lurch from side to side. All the gravel and sand has been washed into the ditches and clogs the culvert. Other things not on the to-do list, regrading the road and recutting water bars before the next storm. I turn into the field, lurch across the foundation of the stone wall and into the long grass. As I drive the tractor down toward the ewe's bloated body, a brown lamb comes running full speed from the other side of the field, crying in a desperate voice much larger than its tiny form seems capable of making. What the hell, I think, as I stop the tractor, jam on the parking brake, and step down to pick up the lamb. Has it escaped out of Kyla's care and followed me all the way up the field behind the tractor? For several minutes I'm confused, but this one is a ram lamb, and I swear the other one was a ewe. This brother must have decided to run out to call 911, leaving his sister by the mother's side. What's incredible is how this small creature, who looks nearly identical to a white-tailed fawn, is acting domesticated from birth. How does he know that a human is safety, is food, is the next best thing to his mother, who he must have figured is never going to respond? I put the lamb down, and he paws at his mother's stretched and bluish belly, tries to tug at her swollen, upended teat. I wonder how long it took the milk to congeal after she died, or how long after they were born she was struck down. Somehow these lambs seem to have gotten some nutrition and are fighting strong. I heave the ewe into the tractor bucket, lifting her 2 legs at a time and shuffling her in sideways. She's heavy and as stiff as lumber, except for her head, which lolls and leaks a foul-smelling, bloody serum. I scoop the little lamb up and put him on my lap, driving with one hand along the bumpy road back to the barn. He doesn't struggle. He seems to find the tractor seat and the noise and heat of the engine perfectly ordinary. In front of us, I can see his mother's stiff feet jouncing around with each bump in the road. I'm going to have to drive through the farm like this in order to drop the lamb off before I head to the forest to bury her. I hope no one visiting gets a shock. Born domesticated, these lambs will need me to survive, and yet I have no desire for a pet. I will have to get up every other hour all night long and give them milk. I will have to sleep downstairs so as not to wake everyone else, and the dogs will want to be with the lambs, and the lambs will cry all night if they are in the house. But leaving them in the barn means making a new pen, since every stall has wide boards where a newborn can get through. Fixing pens is not on the list. Paying for milk replacer is not in the budget. Lambing season ended 2 months ago, and I am finally getting caught up on sleep. This lamb is super cute, though. He's almost purring on my lap. I'll give you a chance, I tell him. And right then that seems like the right name, Chance. His sister will be Lightning. Everyone living or visiting the farm will be beguiled. Never have there been 2 more spoiled and demanding lambs. They are voracious feeders, and for the next month, Chance and Lightning are utterly uninterested in anything but milk, which Kyla, Wren, or I mix up from a powder and give to them in human baby bottles, 8, then 6, then 3 times a day. They bond to humans, not sheep, and no matter how hard we try to get them to move out to the field with the flock, they will not go. Without a mother to introduce them to the marvelous salad bar that awaits in each field, they seem to have little interest in or knowledge of how to graze. They associate food with us, and we have not been getting down on all fours in the grass. They follow us everywhere on the farm, climb our legs and eat our clothes, nibble on the lettuce and taste the blueberries. Folks from all over who come to stay in our refuge village are charmed by Chance and Lightning coming over for a head scratch. The lambs close their eyes and wag their tails in bliss, lie down and rest their chins on a human thigh. Peter starts taking people down in the field late in the evening as the stars are coming out. People who've never touched a sheep or sat in long grass or felt the grasshopper chorus fill every pore or seen so many stars. He tells them the story of how the lambs survived as orphan newborns way out there in the storm. He loves it. He's someone who's always moving, often tightly wound, and it slows him down. He loves to share it with others, the healing magic of sheep meditation. Most people know animals as pets, who we bend our lives around until they die, or as units of production, pushed to gain weight in order to be a bigger chunk of food. Pastoralism gives us a third way, in which the relationship with animals is so many things: companionship, love, ceremony, livelihood, food, clothing, and also an important doorway into the wild community of plants and beings that are all around us and are not so easily seen. From their words and faces, I believe that for some people, in those sheep meditations in the field, repair is happening, that something feels more coherent and more whole. Thank you. So that's a little taste. And I think we have another half hour, right? Is that right? Yeah. So what do you think, Chelsea? Do you want to... Do you have questions or conversations that you want to start with before we turn it over to the group?
Yes, thank you so much. That was just beautiful. I think so much of what I loved about reading your book was that it feels like sort of the questions I'm posing in my book, which are these burning questions for me about belonging and place and staying put, which I hope we have finally managed to do here in Vermont, feel like questions that you are living so deeply into and that you express and explore in this way that is so grounded and tender and lyrical and beautiful. And I just felt so much resonance reading your book. And one of the words that I was just thinking about in what you were reading is this word incendence, which is a Thomas Berry word that I encountered through a trail of other writers. And he writes about incendence as this immersion of going into place as opposed to transcendence of rising above. And I just felt so much of that deep immersion in place. And I think one question I had for you is, there's a point, I'm going to see if I can just read a sentence if you don't mind. In your book, when you write about cosmology of place and how we can, well, let me just read what you write here. Let me see. You're speaking about your encounter with a Navajo shepherd and some of the wisdom you encountered there, and you write, "I do not carry their ancestral and cultural wisdom, but I now have a sense of how our life on the land requires a cosmology in order to embody health and balance. The approach guided by a worldview of separate and inanimate parts, which is the system of farming taught and practiced in our dominant culture, fails us over and over again. This much is clear. To make one's own cosmology is possible, I believe, with enough attention and attending, and that cosmology becomes a guide for how to respond to change." And that has just sat with me, and I think gets at so much of my questions about what does it mean to be a human being living on the land in whatever scale we find ourselves. And I was just curious if you could say more about that idea of cosmology.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think what I mean by cosmology is arises for me from this notion of attending and attuning to something. So it's like the practice of deeply attuning to, could be a person, it could be a body of work, but it could also be a place or a part of a place. And I think when you really deeply begin to notice something and attune to it, you see how multidimensional it is. And through that, you can start to feel connected in ways that really bring you into reciprocal caretaking, like what I guess Robin Kimmer, who's often quoted on this, would call a mutual flourishing. And I think that we live in a world that's increasingly pressuring us to be more productive, to move faster, to take in more information at a higher rate of speed. And we're not meant to process at that rate. And we're not meant to understand the world on a global scale. We're not designed that way. And so we're completely out of sync with the pressures of the modern world. And we have to counterbalance that if we're going to feel a sense of well-being and if we're going to take care of our places and our communities and our families. So I think any practice of attuning and tuning in is very important for all of us, and especially in this time, whatever form that may take. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I so agree. And there's so much at stake in that, in our sort of dispersal. I feel myself so often just completely, almost out of body, dispersed in media and in events happening thousands of miles away, which are important to know about and to respond to, but also can make it hard to ground and to connect with each other and to understand sort of what's happening in our immediate surroundings, and how we start to practice that attention is a question for me, for sure, in the moment.
Yeah. No, I think this is a question and a topic, right, that's kind of burning for all of us right now, is this sort of like this question of like, how do I be a responsible person and citizen and take in the traumas of the world and do something about it? Like, what can I do? And not sort of become collapsed by it, and also not become traumatized by it, because if you're traumatized by it, then all of your energy has to go into like healing yourself and taking care of yourself, and you're not able to reach out anymore. So to counterbalance kind of everything that's coming in with a strength of sort of like what that you can take care of yourself, I think is very important. And I don't write about that explicitly in the book, but I do write about it, if you know what I mean. And I think Chelsea does too. Yeah. My book is really about the practice. It's about practicing your life, really, and aligning your mind and your values and what you love with how you live your life. Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that so struck me reading your book, is what I sort of wanted to pose and start to wrestle with in Mother Creaturekin was this idea of mothering as partly being a mother to my daughter, but sort of more deeply, and I think in some ways more urgently, what any of us, whether or not we have children, could engage in as a practice of mothering, as something that is unconditional and is intent on care and is looking at ways to deepen and widen those sort of circles of care, and doing that even when it's inconvenient and hard and tedious and daily and exhausting. And thinking about that as a practice of earth care was just something I encountered in your book of what it looks like to commit to that and to live that out.
One of the things that fascinated me about reading yours, Chelsea, is you've had to move around so much, and yet you've still tried to cultivate this sense of belonging wherever you go, and that's really interesting to me, because I'm someone who's like only lived on 2 pieces of land my entire life. So, it's like, but I think that you speak to a majority of people who don't have the privilege of staying put, and it's like, I think we need to learn to cultivate that sense of connection and belonging, even if we're only somewhere temporarily, right? Like to kind of carry home with you really is an important thing.
I you asked a question in your book of, I won't say it quite right, but essentially what, even when we have said goodbye to places, what sort of lessons of belonging can we carry forward with us. And that was such a hopeful question for me, because I sort of agonize about someone who writes about place and cares so deeply about being connected to place and has moved so many times that that continued uprooting has been so, in so many ways, just of course disorienting and difficult, and finding how to sort of also grapple with the grief of saying goodbye to some of the places I've loved most deeply that we weren't able to stay in. And I just found a lot of hope in that question of, those places gave me so much, and what can I bring with me? There's the pain of saying goodbye, and there's also the ways that those landscapes continue to sort of live through me and have informed my practices of living somewhere. And so I found that to be a really hopeful question too, that I'm working to apply now in Vermont.
Nice. Well, let's open it up to all of you. We can pass this microphone. Oh, great. Or we have another microphone. If anyone has questions for both of us or either one of us, or just a comment to share or an idea.
I really like the motif you have of it's not on the list, because these days there are so many things which were not on the list, including like yesterday's march, which it didn't have to be on the list, but it was on the list. So that responsibility for the lives of the animals you raise is very touching, especially in the way you talked about lightning and chance. So how did they do growing up?
Lightning and Chance did great. They, they both went to loving homes. They were such characters. I just had to find someone who wanted to take them on as pets. And so one went to Cape Cod, I think, and the other one stayed in Vermont. But yeah, they just they went to new homes eventually, because I run a farm as a commercial operation, so I can't keep a lot of pets that need a lot of special attention and won't go out with the flock. So they were more like dogs by the time. So I have to be disciplined about the animals I keep, but I'm also disciplined about if I'm not going to just send an animal to a butcher just because I need to get rid of it. I'm disciplined about my attachment, is essentially. So yeah, I will find people who want to raise that animal up to live a long life. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Hello, thank you both very much. Really, I read The Saltstones. I haven't read your book yet, but I will buy one and ask for you to sign it. So I'd like to just kind of step beyond your particular authorship. That's amazing, because I believe that both of you are also involved in Emergence magazine and in Milkweed, which is bringing out a lot of different voices of nature writers right now. And some of us here are trying to be nature writers. So I'd be really interested to hear kind of where you both feel we can be most useful in words that are coming out to tell new stories or to relook in new or unique ways. And I have a very specific question for you from some of my recent work as I'm grappling with the question. It's become very avant-garde now to talk about more than human beings in the technology. I know it comes from Sensuous, the book of Abrams, but I've kind of wrestled with that, and an editor of some of my writing, also, who's Native American, was like, I really like other than human beings, because by more than human beings, we already are putting others in a hierarchy like above us. It sounds kind of technical, but it seems important, the language we use. So it's a very specific question, but I think it has broader implications. So I'm interested on your thoughts about this, and just kind of beyond your own particular work, what can be helpful in the world unfolding.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I I'm not with Emergence anymore. One of our Emergence people is here, which I'm so happy about. And Emergence is doing such beautiful work. And so yeah, maybe I'll answer the first part of that question first, which is sort of how we can, what kinds of stories or voices are needed right now. And to me, someone asked me once that, so many people are writing about climate change or the environment. And she said, I don't think I have anything new to contribute to that conversation. And to me, I think we all have stories about that actually that are really important, that the specific things we're noticing and witnessing and the ways that we're feeling those changes in our bodies and that we're seeing them in our places, in our communities. I think bearing witness to that is such an important role for the writer or the artist or the poet, whoever it might be, that and even just that old writing advice of God is in the details, that actually those particular specific ways that each of us sees and encounters the world are unique to us, even if we're telling a story that is a sort of planet-wide story that everyone is in some way dealing with right now. And so I think finding and paying attention to what sparks you and what are those sort of burning questions that you're carrying, and how can you find ways of writing into that tell us how you're living through this moment. To me, those are interesting stories. And then, yes, I have also grappled with, and I remember conversations at Emergence where we talked about how do we say, people might say, well, there's natural world, there's environment, there's more than human world, and greater than human world, and other than human world, and how do we, I don't know, I don't have an answer about what sort of the best way to say that is, but I really appreciate that we're reaching for language that is trying to get at this sense that we exist in this interconnected web of life and of different species and ecosystems. And I think that's a beautiful gift of writing and creation, is figuring out how do we stretch our language to start to reach for something that feels like a good way to talk about that. I don't know if you have,
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I mean, I think that it's really easy to get caught up in the details and the language of these things. And I think, like nature writing itself, nature writing used to have a very narrow definition. And that's because as humans, we kind of had a narrow definition of what's out there, then it's not us, it's separate from us. And I think that it's a good sign that all of that has started to change, and that we don't feel the need quite so much to separate it. And likewise, in the nature writing community, nature writing is very broad now and much more diverse, thankfully, than it ever was. And I think having that diverse set of voices, and to define place as anything, it doesn't have to be like a vast landscape that's, where no human beings are, so I think that this like broadening of definitions is really good. And I think that I'm a big believer as a writer, there's often advice given that you should know who your audience is and what they want. I think that's absolutely backwards. Like, you should write without thinking about your audience. You should write what's coming out of you and what's meant to be written that only you can write. And if you do that, you'll stop asking yourself the question, like, is this worthy, or is someone going to read this, or does this contribute? You'll just be writing what you really feel on fire to write. Yeah. I see there's one hand behind you. Yeah.
Yeah. I was really struck by some of your comments about the sheep and like trying to get back to the flock. And here we're having this whole conversation about belonging. And so I guess like what I'm wondering is, what have you learned about belonging from spending so much time around sheep? Because, like as human beings, we have both this drive to belong, and we also have this drive to individuate and to become uniquely ourselves, which this might be a projection, but I don't know if you see sheep as trying to become uniquely themselves. But yet they have such a strong impulse to be part of a flock. You know, so I just, those were just reflections as I was listening. And so I guess the short question is, what have you learned about belonging from spending so much time around sheep?
Yeah, thank you for that question. A lot, actually. I think, yeah, sheep obviously are herd animals, and they've learned that because they were always prey. And so they need to be together for safety. And humans don't have that feeling, right? I mean, we were always to some degree predators. We probably were prey too, and we probably should be prey more than we are. Maybe we'd band together more successfully, but we don't. We've eliminated all of our predators in the wild. So, but I think what I've learned so much from is the way the mothers and offspring bond to one another, and it's really intricate. Like even in a flock of 100 sheep, which is about how many I have in the summer, the lambs and the mothers will know distinctly the individual voices, and so they can be like really far apart in the field. And if a lamb's calling, that lamb's mother will know to go to it. And they also bond. I write a lot about how at birth they bond through the birth fluid and the saliva, and they not only bond to one another, but they bond to the piece of ground, and they bond to the plants that they've been eating that are in their microbiome, that are in their saliva. So there's like this incredibly complex coevolution and bonding that happens from the soil to the grass to the animal's offspring. And then, of course, for me as like a student of all of this, like I'm learning, how to take them to those plants that they prefer and all those things. So pastoralists were also co-evolving with their animals and the grasslands because the animals were dependent on their shepherds to take them where they needed to go. So, and this system is 12,000 years old. I mean, we know this in our DNA. Like, we know how to do this, and we have depended on this as a human species, and we've just forgotten a lot of it. So that to me is about belonging. Yeah.
We do need to give you time to give the audience time to buy books and give you time to sign them. So yeah.
Okay, one more.
I've been a vegetable farmer, a small farm in New Hampshire for 20 years, so both of your books have resonated very deeply with me. And I have all kinds of comments and dog ears I have in my books, but I will keep my question short, which is I'm interested in how you both approach the forms of your book, because although you have many similar themes, the form has some difference.
That was a big learning process for me. This was my first book, and I sort of set out to write 5 incredibly long chapters. And when I turned them in to my editor, she said, we might want to break these up a little bit. And I sort of went the complete other direction, where I took that as permission to make some incredibly short chapters. And so there are chapters in the book that are a single paragraph or maybe a page. And that was such a good learning for me, because I had sort of wanted to do that, and I didn't think a book was allowed to. I don't know why I thought that, but I think so many of the reflections and stories I ended up putting into the book, so many of them I was sort of trying to force into being part of another chapter or part of another train of thought. And once I allowed them to stand on their own, it was a gift to realize that was enough, and it was okay for a chapter to be a paragraph long. And that was actually all I wanted to say about this particular thing. And so that was an evolution for me, for sure. And something I'll carry forward to just sort of trust trust the stories that are wanting to be told, and to give them the space on the page that feels like the right thing. And I'm always grateful for a good editor too. So.
Yeah, my biggest challenge structurally was that I wanted it to cover 20 years, but I wanted to write it as one seasonal cycle, beginning in the spring with lambing and ending in the spring. And so I had to figure out a way that the reader would know that it was 20 years, but it was 1 year. And so what I did is my daughter was, the stories that I had in my head that I wanted to write down when she was a baby or she was very young are at the beginning of the book. And then she gets progressively older, even though maybe, that one chapter is about April and the next chapter is about May, she's like taken a leap in years. So that became my signal. And then my mother also, I joke that my mother becomes younger in the book, but she really did because she had dementia. And so she sort of, her dementia is also woven through of sort of, as she loses her memory, she's still connected to the land through her body. So I think it works. It was the only way I could figure out how to do it. And that was my biggest challenge structurally. But otherwise it's really written as these seasonal stories. And I started and ended with spring because that's kind of the essence of the shepherd's life is what happens in the spring. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Thank you all for coming and being such a great audience.